Bloodstained Curse of the Moon is an 8-bit style game that captures the spirit of the classic games that inspired it while still having its own identity. It's a spin-off to Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. If you're not familiar with the Bloodstained games, they're spiritual successors to the Castlevania games. Those include the Classicvanias and the Metroidvanias. Classicvanias are tough, linear, and they're about mastering the skills you have and keep throughout the adventure. Metroidvanias are easier, freer, and you get all sorts of weapons and skills. The main game in the Bloodstained series is Ritual of the Night, which is more similar to the Metroidvanias that appeared later in the Castlevania series. Curse of the Moon is more inspired by the Classicvanias, mainly Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. That means the game is more about action and platforming rather than leveling up and exploring a huge map. Curse of the Moon was developed and published by Inti Creates, but also revised by Koji Igarashi, the producer of multiple Castlevania games. The game actually came out before Ritual of the Night, so this could be a lot of people's introduction to the Bloodstained world. If I compare it to the world of the Castlevania games, I'd say the Bloodstained world is similar to it, but it has a more fantastical tone. The world of Castlevania was pretty fantastical too, but I think it had a darker and more grounded tone. Despite the game being inspired by Classicvanias, it also changes some things up, and I think some of these changes are for the better. I love the Classicvanias, but some gameplay elements can be frustrating. Usually in a Classicvania, you use sub-weapons by pressing up and then attack. In Curse of the Moon, there is a dedicated button for sub-weapons. Stairs are infamous in Classicvanias because you're essentially locked onto them. You press either up or down to climb the stairs accordingly, and when you're on them, you're slow and the game likes pestering you with enemies. In Curse of the Moon, you're actually pretty quick on stairs. You can even jump onto the stairs, but you can't jump off of them. Despite these changes, your jump is still fixed, meaning when you jump, you can't switch directions and you only have one jump height. An ally does make you jump higher, and another makes platforming almost a non-issue. When you first make a save file, you get the option to choose between veteran difficulty and casual difficulty. Veteran difficulty adheres to Classicvania rules, and that means limited lives and knockback. Casual difficulty gives you unlimited lives, and it also removes knockback. It's great for newcomers who aren't familiar with Classicvanias. The graphics look great. They're not exactly high-end, but that's not what the team was going for. They were focused on making a game that respected its inspirations. It's colorful and has that old-school charm. They really tried to make it look like a classic Castlevania game, and I think they succeeded. However, that doesn't mean the game can't pull off some impressive visuals. There are definitely moments in the game that would have been impossible to pull off on those classic games. The pixel art can range from good to amazing. The sprites, environments, and the atmosphere of the game really appeal to me, and people love those classic games. The music and sound effects are also great. They capture that old school sound wonderfully. The sound effects pack a lot of punch, but they still sound retro. I honestly love all of the tracks. Their energetic sound fits the gameplay and they're a joy to listen to even on their own. While I love them, I don't think they're as good as the music from the games they used as inspiration. They're still good, but there's not a song that's very memorable or a song that just makes me want to listen to it over and over again. Now, let's get into the plot. Zangetsu was a man who was given the moon's curse by demons. He relentlessly pursued the demons who cursed him. One night, he sensed the looming presence of a great demon. He readies himself for a journey that will test his skills, courage, and even compassion. If you're wondering what the moon's curse is, I'll talk about it later. Zangetsu was a cold guy. He despises demons and anything that involves them. However, he admires power and strength. Show them to him and then he'll respect you. The structure of the game is similar to Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. On your way to the main castle where the great demon is, you recruit allies during your adventure. The map is also pretty similar to Castlevania 3. There aren't any branching paths between stages like in that game, but there are alternate routes within the stages. The game takes you to a wide variety of locations. There's a train station, a frozen cavern, a sandy treasury, and more. You can also see the castle in the distance here. It looks like a hand. I like how the moon gets progressively fuller as you move from stage to stage. It's a subtle but neat indicator of your progress. If you're familiar with classic Castlevania, you might already know what sets Zangetsu apart from the protagonists in those games. Instead of a whip, Zangetsu uses a sword. Because of this, he has less range. His sword isn't the best, but it gets the job done. You can also upgrade the sword and Zangetsu himself, but I'll talk about that later. In addition to the sword, Zangetsu can use sub-weapons. They help in certain situations. You pick up weapon points to use them, and each sub-weapon takes a different amount of weapon points. There aren't any double or triple shots. In classic Vanias, these let you throw more than one sub-weapon in rapid succession. Despite this, I think the sub-weapons in this game are fine without them. Some aren't really meant for rapid use. In the first stage, you just walk around and kill some easy enemies in a manner similar to the first level of the first Castlevania. It's a nice introduction to the gameplay. There are lamps scattered in the stages that give you a variety of items such as health, magic potions which give you weapon points, and bags of money. The bags of money just add more points to your score. Get enough points and you get an extra life. Purple lamps give sub-weapons, but be careful because once you replace a sub-weapon, you lose your previous one until you find it again. There are permanent upgrades in the stages too. Also, try hitting walls because they might hide some secrets like an item or a passageway. Eventually, you hop onto a train where you fight your first boss. This boss is pretty easy, but that's to be expected for the first boss. When you kill it, it does its desperation attack. A desperation attack is one last effort for the boss to kill you, but I don't think these attacks can actually kill you. Still, dodging them feels cool. Once this boss is dead, a character appears. This is Miriam, a swordbinder. A swordbinder can summon forth demons at will. However, Miriam refuses to use her power for evil. Now here comes an interesting decision. You could talk to her and let her join you in battle, or you can kill her and gain a new ability. You could also ignore her entirely. Having you choose what to do with potential allies is such a neat idea. The intended way to progress is probably to recruit everyone you find, but the fact that you have the choice to kill them or leave them and go to the game alone is an interesting feature that adds replayability. I love how cold Zangetsu is to basically anyone he meets. He's not a very nice person, but he might let you live if you're useful. This idea of recruiting allies is similar to a mechanic in Castlevania 3, but in that game you could only recruit or refuse allies. Also, you couldn't have more than one ally. When you recruit a new ally when you already have one, the previous one leaves you. Curse the Moon is definitely less punishing if you recruit all of the potential allies, because if you die, you respawn as an available party member. They basically act as extra lives. If you lose an ally, you have to spend your current life without that ally. If all of your characters die, you lose a life. I let Miriam join me, so let me tell you about her. She's the protagonist in the main game, Ritual of the Night. She wields a whip, she can jump high, and she can slide. Think of her as a classic Castlevania protagonist, but more acrobatic. The whip is useful for hitting enemies at a greater range than Zangetsu's sword. The high jump is great for reaching areas that Zangetsu can't reach. The slide is more of a gimmick than anything. I barely use it aside from reaching areas that required me to use it. Speaking of areas that require me to use the character's unique ability, they are scattered throughout the game. Sometimes you have to combine abilities of multiple characters too. There are also shortcuts in the stages. Skeletons of fallen adventurers point you to them, and you'll usually need a specific ally to access them. This idea of having areas that are only accessible with a certain ally was also in Castlevania 3. Miriam also has different sub-weapons. The characters have their own sub-weapons, but they all share the same weapon points. Now that the stage has been finished, I should talk about what the Curse the Moon actually is. Zangetsu is cursed to drift against the flow of time. He can actually turn back time. In the game, he can go back to a previous stage, but it reverses his decisions. That means if he recruited an ally, he'll lose that ally. Any bosses killed will return. Also, he'll lose all the upgrades he got from that stage. This is actually a pretty neat concept. If you regret killing a potential party member, you can go back and either ignore or recruit that potential party member instead. You'll be getting companions for the next couple of stages. This stage lets you get used to Miriam. Right from the start, you meet these enemies with wide hitboxes. They're risky to fight with Zangetsu's sword, but Miriam can hit them from a safe distance. A lot of the obstacles here are really meant for Miriam, but Zangetsu is still viable. You go down to this frozen cavern, kill the second boss, and then you meet Alfred, an alchemist. He uses demons for alchemy, so obviously Zangetsu is displeased. Alfred is the equivalent of Sypha Belnades from Castlevania 3. Alfred has a buster rod that he can use to whack enemies with, but it's really terrible. It has pitiful range and an attack that takes too long to finish, making you vulnerable. You're meant to use Alfred's alchemy spells. You can find them in purple lamps. There are occasionally green lamps that give Alfred a really strong spell. The spells act as his sub-weapons. Just like how Stage 2 lets you get used to Miriam, Stage 3 lets you get used to Alfred. Right from the beginning, monsters are on the ceiling and will drop on you. They're hard to hit properly without being careful. However, Alfred's Ring of Fire makes things way easier. Now we meet the last party member, Gebel, another swordbinder. He's like Alucard from Castlevania 3. I mentioned that swordbinders could summon 4 demons as well. It's more noticeable with Gebel. His basic attack summons 3 bats that hit enemies in an arc. However, this gives him some weaknesses. His range is not very good and he can't hit enemies really low to the ground like rats. He doesn't have any sub-weapons. Instead, he can transform into a bat, like Alucard. When you break a purple lamp as Gebel, you just get a lot of weapon points. As a bat, he can fly around and still attack. However, staying in the bat form continuously drains weapon points. A move that lets you fly upwards quickly and a dash attack also take weapon points. Strangely, he can't destroy breakable walls. It's not the worst negative ever, but there are some useful things hidden in those and you should try to get them. Just like the previous stages, this stage lets you get used to Gebel. Some enemies are easier to hit with Gebel's attack arc, and there's this shortcut near the start you can take using his bat form. So, we finally have everyone we can recruit. Zangetsu has the most health, so he's like a tank to me. Miriam is for fights that require range and for high jumps. I don't like using Miriam's high jumps that much because they can be unwieldy and make me fall to my death. I rarely use Alfred unless I really need his spells. Lastly, I mainly use Gebel for skipping platforming sections and saving me from bad jumps. I also switch to him for breaking purple lamps when I want to keep the current sub-weapons for the other party members. I usually give Zangetsu the Demon Essence, which boosts the player's damage, and I give Miriam her Massive Axe. Notice how I said the Demon Essence boosts the player's damage, not Zangetsu. Zangetsu can activate the buff and it'll apply it to every character you have. I don't really keep a sub-weapon for Alfred that often because his spells are usually situational for me. I already mentioned that Miriam, Alfred, and Gebel are reminiscent of characters from Castlevania 3. However, there's no equivalent for Grant the Nasty. He could jump high, crawl on surfaces, and he can even control his jumps. He also has an affinity for knives. Miriam is the closest equivalent for Grant because of her high jump and usage of knives. Zangetsu isn't based on a character from Castlevania 3, but it might be based on Getsu Fuma from Getsu Fumaden, a game similar to Castlevania. Now that we have all our party members, I'll let you know what you get if you kill them instead. When you kill a potential party member, Zangetsu gets a new soul art. Killing Miriam grants him Crescent Moon. Your basic attack in the air now hits enemies in a wide arc. It's much better than your default basic attack in the air. Killing Alfred grants you Blood Moon, a double jump. Very useful for fixing bad jumps. Finally, killing Gebel grants you New Moon, a dash. It helps me get around faster and it helps me access alternate routes. These new skills will make it easier for you to beat the game with just Zangetsu. You can also ignore all the potential party members and finish the game without any soul arts, but it's really difficult. The last few stages take place in a castle, like Castlevania 3. Stage 6 starts you off with fighting these weird spinning things that also fly around. They're pretty hard to hit. I think this stage has my favorite track. At least one of my favorites. Very ominous, but energetic. I hate the section before the boss. You got these tanky armored guys throwing hammers while floating heads harass you. Reminds me of that part in the original Castlevania before the death fight. I hate it there, and I hate it here. Skipping ahead to the last stage, what I like about it is that the name changes if you have allies with you or not. If you recruited any party members, the stage is called Curse the Moon. But if you didn't, the stage is called Cleave the Moon. This might be a reference to what Zangetsu's name means in Japanese, which means to cleave the moon. It could also be a reference to what Zangetsu does to the boss if he's alone. Swarms of dark energy appear throughout the stage. They're fairly easy to avoid, but they do provide some intense sequences. Before you meet the final boss, the game generously gives you an extra life, so you basically have unlimited tries to beat the boss. Now, for the final boss. The strong demon Zangetsu sends at the beginning emerges through the stained glass windows and the fight begins. This is Gremory. She summons those swarms from earlier and they can be a real nuisance to deal with. You can see how bad it gets and how often they get hit. Luckily, Alfred's Ring of Fire prevents them from hurting you. Once you get her health low enough, she flies to the very top of the castle. The floor below you lifts you up so you can fight her second phase. This was a tough fight, but learning what her attacks do is the key to victory. When you kill her, her wings shatter and she's consumed by flames. Once Gremory is dead, you and her are back at the bottom of the tower. She perishes and a ball of dark energy appears. There are multiple endings for this game. The endings depend on if you recruited, ignored, or killed your potential allies. If you killed or ignored all of the potential allies, the way you defeat Gremory is different. She does her attack where she makes a red moon, and you have to charge Zangetsu up to perform an attack that splits her in half. I think the worst ending is killing all of your allies and then Gremory. Zangetsu takes the dark energy and becomes a new Dark Emperor. This ending is called Emperor of Darkness. One of the more interesting endings is when you ignore all of the potential allies and beat Gremory. Before the dark energy could reach Zangetsu, Miriam, Alfred, and Jeeble protect him by holding the darkness back. The overwhelming darkness makes him collapse and Zangetsu escapes. Once outside the castle, Zangetsu realized that the world and those who live in it were crafted by Gremory, and this truth was shown to him by the curse of the moon. The world crumbled, and Zangetsu saw his weakness for not killing or recruiting those who saved them. This sparked a change in Zangetsu. Now, he readies himself for the upcoming battles ahead. This ending is called Nightmare's End. However, if you have all your allies, Zangetsu rushes to grab hold of the dark energy before it could attack his friends. A surprising act of selflessness for someone who's usually cold. After going through so much with his allies, he regained lost emotions and protected them. His friends escaped the castle, while Zangetsu was consumed by the darkness. This sets the stage for Nightmare Mode. The credits roll as they show pictures of your adventure. How nice. However, I wish I could skip the credits for future playthroughs. On to Nightmare Mode. This is a continuation of the story with some harder gameplay. Zangetsu's allies venture back to the castle to save him. I'm not entirely sure why they have to go through the whole game again to save him. Maybe they went back home to rest first? Also, how did the bosses come back but not the final boss? Oh, it's not that important. We get more gameplay and that's what matters. Nightmare Mode starts the game with all of Zangetsu's allies. This lets you go through areas you couldn't before. The bosses are stronger with deadlier attacks. I don't really have much to say about the stages because they remain mostly unchanged. However, the last stage is completely different. The last stage is called Fallen Moon's Requiem. It's a test of your skills with Zangetsu's allies before you fight him in his Dark Emperor form. A menacing door prevents the trio from reaching him, and they must split up to collect 3 talismans to unlock it. The trio splits up, so you can't switch between them. If you die, you lose a life. These sections can be tough, especially if you haven't been using certain party members as much as others. This level looks like a nightmare. The red sky and raging clouds surround spiky mountains that also pierce them. At the end of each of these sections, you fight a mini-boss. I don't really have anything to say about it because they're not that much of a challenge. Also, I like to say that the music in these sections is one of my favorite tracks. It sounds action-packed, but a little somber too. Zangetsu sacrificed himself to save these three. Now, they're willing to return the favor. In a reversal of a typical Castlevania game, once you open the door, you walk down a long staircase, and notice how the moon is dark, and only a ring of green light surrounding it lets you know it's even there. You go into a room with some supplies and an extra life. The next room has your friend, who you must defeat and save. You enter the room and see Zangetsu wearing a tattered purple cloak and drinking. He throws his drink on the floor, shattering it, and then tosses his sword into the air. He grabs it with his horribly long arm, using the sword with it, creating a sight. He jumps off his throne and paralyzes Alfred and Jibo. His cloak comes off and you can see just how badly the darkness has affected him. You only get to control Miriam in this fight. This is probably the hardest fight in the game for me. Zangetsu is super fast, and it took me a while to even figure out what his attacks are and how to avoid them. Occasionally, Alfred and Jibo recover from being paralyzed to help you, but it won't be long until Zangetsu paralyzes them again. Once Zangetsu's health is low enough, he'll prepare a devastating attack. However, Alfred and Jibo recover from being paralyzed. 6 skulls appear in the arena, spewing fire. Alfred prepares a powerful spell, while you and Jibo protect them. The skulls disappear, and then Alfred summons 6 clones of himself to shoot out powerful magical projectiles at Zangetsu, finally ending the fight. The trio stand on a cliff, watching Zangetsu's soul shoot out of the castle and into the sky. They have defeated the Dark Emperor and saved their friend. The sun rises and they solemnly stand together. It's sad that they couldn't save his life, but it's nice that they could free his soul. Zangetsu's story seems to continue elsewhere. After the credits, Zangetsu awakens on top of a building. The camera pans down and it's revealed that he has been transported to a strange futuristic city. This city might be from another game series from the developer and publisher Inti Creates, called Gunvolt. That's the end of the story. It had a pretty good ending. A story of sacrifice and friendship. You could say the story is too light, but I don't mind. Expanding more on the story would have been nice, but it might have compromised the retro feel the team is going for. I already talked about the ending you get for beating the game with Zangetsu without any soul arts, but I want to talk about the gameplay. If you're a Castlevania veteran, you might find the regular game too easy. Well, if you want a challenge, I highly recommend playing the game on veteran, only Zangetsu and without any soul arts. The game really felt like a Castlevania when I played it that way. Every death hurt and I needed to learn some tricky platforming because I couldn't resort to Jibo. There are still 2 more modes to cover. There's Ultimate Mode and Boss Rush Mode. Ultimate Mode starts you off with Zangetsu with all of his soul arts. He even has a new attack. If you hold the attack button, he'll charge up, and once you let go, he'll make a large crescent slash with his sword. It doesn't take long to charge, and it gives him some great range and damage. The bosses also have their advanced attacks found in Nightmare Mode. It really gives the player the ultimate experience. The final boss is Gremry again. Boss Rush Mode is what it sounds like. Just a series of bosses to test how well you do. You're put into a room with 2 big health pickups and all of the sub-weapons. Jibo doesn't even get his bat form unless you pick it up. Practice killing bosses without the sub-weapons. It'll help you learn their patterns without resorting to an easy way out. That was Bloodstained Curse the Moon. It's a fantastic game that fans of classic Castlevania will definitely enjoy. For those who never played those games, this is a good introduction to that kind of gameplay, thanks to the casual difficulty. While the game is great, I wish it had branching paths like in Castlevania 3. It would have given this game even more replay value. I absolutely love this game. It has plenty of charm and fun. The story is simple, but it's enough for this kind of game. The gameplay is just so good. However, I did have some gripes with the stages. Stage 3 had quicksand with crushing spikes on the ceiling. It wasn't very exciting or fun to wait for the spikes to be raised. There was also rain in Stage 5. Most of the rain really messes with me because it messes with the movement. The rain slowly pushes you in a direction and it makes it harder to do certain jumps. The game can actually be pretty hard if you're not used to Classicvanias, but that's what casual mode is for. Curse of the Moon is significantly easier than the games that inspired it, and this allows new players to enjoy the game without too much frustration. Still, I highly encourage you to play on Veteran mode eventually. Mastering platforming and combat is really fun. I also love the little references to Castlevanias in the level design, even if they can be difficult to play through. The game truly feels like a compilation of memorable moments from those games. The more you play, the more you learn how the game works. You learn attack patterns and little nuances. There was serious love and attention put into this game, and you should definitely play it. Thanks for watching.